Just very quickly, what I'm going to ask the guys to do first of all is to introduce themselves and sort of tell us a little bit about their triathlon career and experiences and why they're here to talk to us today. So we'll start with Stu.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name's Stuart Anderson. I race for Skechers, Team Free Speed Skechers Performance. So last year we were sponsored by Virgin, but the name has changed just recently. I've been in triathlon since I was 30. I'm 40 now, so I've been racing competitively for 10 years. I've raced across all distances, starting in Olympic distance, and then as I got a bit older, I found that I wanted a different challenge, so I moved up to half Ironman and then Ironman distance. I've raced in Kona 4 times, and I've raced in the World Champs at pretty much every distance. This year I'm racing South Africa with a view to hopefully competing in a Kona again. 2008 and 2010 I was the fastest British age grouper in Kona, so hopefully if I get there this year, then in the 40 age group, then I'll try and do the same.
Thanks, Stu.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hi, my name's Jessica Harrison. I've been racing internationally for 20 odd years now. First for Britain and now for France since 2006, where I live. You can tell from the accent I'm French. So I've really just been racing Olympic distance all that time. I raced in Beijing Olympics and in the London Olympics where I came 9th. Ended my international career last year because you can't keep going forever, and now I'm working full time for my company, Mako Wetsuits. So there you go.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm relatively inexperienced and relatively young. I'm 26 and I've done a few Ironmans. I kind of jumped up quite early, a lot younger than most people would, because it's fun and I like it and it seems to be where my strengths lie. I've done Kona twice, and this recent Kona was the fastest amateur female. Yeah.
Ever. Yeah, we shouldn't underplay that, really.
How am I supposed to follow that? Normally I say I'm a triathlete, but now I just feel rubbish. My name's Joel. I run my own business as a sport nutrition advisor. Also do some triathlon coaching. As a triathlete, I've competed age group for Great Britain 8 times, was 7th at last year's Europeans and 10th at last year's World Championships, which again just feels rubbish in comparison. What else do you need to know? On Tuesday, I had a really good burger. It's really important because people, when they think I'm going to be the food police, and I'm not. I do my job because I like triathlon and I like food. So don't worry, you're not going to walk out of here, with me preaching a message of raw veganism or anything like that, unless that's your bag, in which case, brilliant.
Cool, thanks, Joel. I'm going to leave the microphone down with Joel, actually, to start with, because the first thing that I wanted to talk about when we're talking about nutrition is nothing to do with actual specific race nutrition, but let's start with the basics day to day, and I want to get each of your sort of very quick take on what constitutes a good diet in your view.
Okay, after this, after we've all spoken, you can switch off if you want, because all you really need to know is 80-20. If you can get 80% of what you eat right, and the other 20%, you can kind of be a bit more free and easy with, treat yourself to the things that you like. The crucial thing about that is that if you can get 80% of your diet based on non-processed, whole foods that hopefully, or preferably, you've prepared yourself, they will have a protective effect over that other 20%. So if you just have a rubbish diet all the time, for instance, you don't handle sugar particularly well. But if you have 80% of a really good diet and sugar is your thing, so the other 20% you kind of, sugar, you indulge a little bit, you'll handle it much, much better because of that first 80%. So really good philosophy is just to constantly think, week by week or day by day or even meal by meal, is 80% of this the good stuff? And if it is, then 20% of it, you don't need to worry about quite so much.
What do you think about that, Catherine? Do you live by 80% good, do you think?
80% good sounds like 80% sort of being good, but I'm quite lucky in that the foods that people might count as being good, I happen to really, really like.
Yeah.
So I'm almost like happy to binge on spinach,
Yeah.
which is a bit odd, possibly. But it doesn't feel like an effort for me, just because I really like that food and I really love cooking. So most food that I eat is really unprocessed. I just think keep it natural as possible. And I say to people, if your grandma would be kind of perplexed if you kind of showed her something that you're eating, then it's probably good to steer clear of it. And there's a lot of weird things out there, like just don't even resemble anything that was ever food, like turkey Twizzlers and stuff like that. And it's probably not something that most of the people in this room like go for, but yeah, just keep it natural. That's the best way, I think.
Yeah. What about you, Jess? What's your, if you've got a nutritional principle that you follow in general?
Yeah, in general, excuse me, I find that if I eat everything I have to eat to make sure I don't, lack iron or lack magnesium, whatever, by the time I've eaten all the good things that I need to take in terms of energy, calories, whatever, then I really don't have that much space to eat bad things, as it were. But I find that, if you want a beer or if you, after a race, want to go out for a McDonald's or whatever, if that's your thing, then do it. I know it's my thing. But generally, day to day, I would say that the best principle that I found over the years is to just go for the best quality food you can. You might be able to afford less meat if you're buying the top cuts and everything, but the better quality food you put in your body, the more nutritional benefit you're going to get out of it. And that's basically what I always found, and especially if I live more by a principle, especially when I'm pre-race, trying to make sure you get everything that goes into your body, so you're not missing anything, rather than trying to take things away, saying, "Oh no, I can't eat fat, I can't eat this, I can't eat that." More go by principle of, "No, I need this, I need that, I need that." And once you've checked all those things off the list, then really you're having a pretty good diet.
Cool. Thanks. Stu?
Well, it's difficult to say anything after that. I think I probably echo a little bit of what everyone has said. However, yeah, I think trying to avoid processed food, I think that's really important. For lunchtimes, I work in central London, and I still find time in the mornings to make my own lunch. I find that if I take my own lunch in, then I know exactly what I'm having day to day, and I'm less likely to think, "Oh, shall I go here? Shall I go there?" Because that decision is already made, and it means that I'm taking in my own food, and actually I save a bit of money as well. I think also I'd much prefer to buy more expensive cuts of meat and more expensive food from the supermarket than to eat out sort of more frequently. I think you spend so much money eating out if you're eating out a couple of times a week, even for lunch. So it's when you put that into perspective and think how you can save money and save cash just by making your own food. I like cooking, so that's a pleasure as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good stuff. At that point, we've sort of heard a little bit about what the guys do and what they try and follow in their day-to-day nutrition. So are there any questions from the floor in that area, in particular the lady just there? If Matt's got a microphone, if you don't mind running that out for us. Yeah, see, we kept that quiet. Yeah.
The 80 to 20 thing sounds great, but you see these diagrams of plates all split up into different percentages. I find it really hard to work out what 80 to 20 is. I mean, are you talking about having a nice lunch and then a chocolate bar after? Is that counted, or how do you actually work that out? I know that sounds an obvious question, but I've never been.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. If I or any of us say something that isn't clear, then do please pick us up on it. That's what this session is for, so thank you. There are a few different ways that you can do it, and it's not a hard and fast rule. First of all, people want hard and fast answers when it comes to nutrition and hydration stuff, and actually there aren't really any. So everything, all the best advice is a little bit woolly. A good way to do it, if you do a weekly shop, where you get most of the food that you're going to eat for the week ahead, a good way as you pull up to the checkout at the end of your shop is just to look at what's in your trolley. Have a look at what it is. Okay, I've got 100% of my shopping in my trolley. Is that 75, 80, 85% of it? Is that the good stuff? Is it whole foods? Is it unprocessed? Would my grandma like it? Those kind of things. So that's a really good way of doing it. In terms of the plate analogy, the guys, the nutrition team at Harvard University have come up with a nice, quite simple food plate model, which is just at virtually, if you look at any meal that you have, if you can score it in sort of half, and if half of it is whole food kind of salads or vegetables, and then quarter of it is whole grains, so not processed kind of grains, and quarter of it is some kind of a good quality protein, lean meat, that kind of thing, then splitting each meal up like that is quite a good way to balance your diet. We hear a lot about balancing our diet, don't we? And that's a very difficult thing to do. I echo your comments completely, in that it's just, how do we do it? But actually, just looking at the trolley, if we do a big shop, is a good way of doing it, and looking at each meal and just trying to see, is the majority of it based on whole food stuff that grew, is a good way to start off. If we're going to do that with fruit, let's say for breakfast, then we want to just knock that maybe up to 50% amount, just back a little bit, just because there's a little bit more sugar in fruit, and even as athletes we might not want too much of that. But as a basic philosophy, start with salads, with veg, with fruit, up to about 50% of your plate being that, and then fill the rest up with healthy grains and lean, good quality proteins. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good, thanks.
Have we got any other questions? Yeah, a gentleman there's got a question. We're going to keep you fit today, Matt, running around the hall.
To what extent do you think that diet influences how your body burns fat for fuel? Because I've got friends who advocate high-fat, low-carb diet in order to help your endurance. And my understanding is that it's mostly training that influences that rather than diet. I just wondered what you thought about that.
Joel, do you want to have a stab at that one?
Yeah, that's fine. I think both have a role to play. So I'm sure some of the people here would have seen the Horizon documentary a few weeks ago, Fat v Sugar, where they put a couple of identical twin doctors on the high fat and the high carbohydrate diet, and the guy who was on the high fat diet ended up using fat as fuel but also breaking down a lot of protein, and that long term could cause issues with metabolism and isn't as an efficient fuel source. I think there's a role to play with both. So increasing fat in the diet, so knocking out a bit of carbohydrate, increasing fat, does, certainly the research shows, cause our body to burn fat a bit more efficiently. How much background should I go into? So for long-term endurance events like Ironman, we can't store much carbohydrate. So it might be that at some point we're going to have to switch over to a method of getting our energy from fat as fuel. And it's great if we know that, heck, we're going to be out there for 10 hours and we're going to struggle to get on board enough carbohydrate to keep using that as our fuel source. If we can get efficient at burning fat as fuel, then that's going to be a great safety net for us to have. It should never be the first thing that we're looking at. We should always try and fuel with carbohydrate first. But if we've got a good safety net and we can burn fat very efficiently, then that's good. And we can do that through a diet that is a higher percentage of fat intake, or we can do it through training that's potentially just starved of carbohydrate, so the body doesn't have enough carbohydrate to use to fuel the training, so it gets better at burning fat. Have I made that clear?
Yeah.
Hopefully I have. Pick us up.
Can I just pick up on that point and ask Kat and Stu maybe to comment, because you're the Ironman guys and girls here. Do you do anything specific to manipulate your diet around your long training sessions, or is it, do you focus on, say, trying to burn different fuel types, or would you just train and eat normally? What would be your...
I pretty much just train and eat normally, but eating normally for me, I find that, I don't know whether it's because I'm female and I'm smaller and things like that, but I don't tend to take in as much as other people do.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they seem to kind of force it down and they don't really want it. And I think a lot of people do underfuel, but I think listening to your body always is a good place to start.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'll often take things which aren't regarded as kind of what you'd normally take for like snacks and stuff, like bits of fresh coconut and stuff, which I guess has a bit more fat and probably less carbohydrate than obviously energy gels are pretty much pure carbs. So it's not something that I really sort of think too hard about, but probably something that I'm naturally doing in some way.
Yeah. Cool. Stu, any particular manipulation of your
Yeah,
diet?
I think that racing Ironman, you'll never be able to take on the amount of calories that your body needs for the whole race. And I think it's quite a fine balance between taking on the right amount and taking on too much. Taking on too many calories can put you in a worse position than taking on too little. And if your body becomes efficient at burning fat, then I think, potentially you put yourself in a good position for the race. I find that when I'm out on long rides, if I'm doing 5 or 6 hour rides, and if I'm just using electrolyte in my bottles rather than using a carbohydrate source, then quite quickly my body, after it's burnt everything I've had for breakfast and everything that's stored, starts flipping over to burning fat. And you can kind of almost feel that, because you feel a little bit delusional, maybe you feel a bit miserable, maybe the wind feels harder than it is, and that's kind of when your body is transitioning over. But doing those long rides is kind of where it really starts to kick in, and anything over, I think, sort of 3.5 hours, you're more likely to have used all your carbohydrate unless you're regularly eating, and then you start utilising your fat, and that's kind of what I've found.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as the conversation's drifting a little bit into race nutrition now, we've got different distances represented here. So, Jess, if we start with you, really, can you give us a really brief rundown of Olympic distance race, what you're going to do eating immediately, before, like, the breakfast for the morning, and then through the race and then afterwards? How do you work that?
Yeah, sure. Well, racing in lots of different countries, I have found that the easiest thing to do is basically have the simplest breakfast or pre-race meal possible, something that you're going to be able to find everywhere. I mean, some people take sports cakes that they make. I find it's always a bit difficult to know whether the hotel you're staying at is going to be able to make it for you, keep it cold for you, whatever. So I just go with the plainest thing, easily digestible, white bread and jam. That's about it, and coffee.
How many hours before would you have that for breakfast?
I have that 3 hours before, and I usually, because of the stress of the race, you're starting to feel your stomach's kind of a bit knotted and everything. You don't really want to eat that much, so the white bread and jam is the easiest thing, basically, to force yourself to eat, because it doesn't, it's just mechanical. And I usually force myself to eat a certain amount, even if I'm not hungry, because I know that's the amount I'm going to need, because as I get into the race, I'm actually, nutrition brands are not going to like me very much, because on the bike during the race I take nothing, just water and a very, very, very dilute bit of energy drink. But I find that if I've had a good breakfast and I've been eating well up to the race day, for a 2-hour race, I've got plenty of energy. Obviously, if you're going to be racing Olympic distance and your race is going to be going more towards 2:30, 3 hours plus, then you probably need to think about having some kind of energy gel or a bit more energy drink on the bike. But to be honest, for a sprint distance or an Olympic distance, that's fine. And then I'd really try straight after the race to rehydrate as much as possible. Often, again, your stomach can be quite shaken up from the race, so taking in solids after the race is a bit hard. But you really need to think very hard about how you're going to rehydrate, and especially with salts, and get the minerals and everything back in, because that's how your body's going to be able to flush out all of the waste that it's built up during the race. So that's really it. And then sometimes I indulge myself a little bit after the race as well, because I always feel like it's well, my body's gone through this, now I can give it a little treat. But I probably shouldn't. But hey.
Yeah, a bit of a quick magnum of champagne and that sort of
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Cool.
yeah.
Just while we're on that point, and because we've got a lot, I'm sure we've got athletes doing all different distances. Hands up, people in the audience who are doing Olympic distance races this year or have done them last year. Quite a few, yeah. Keep your hand up if you had something to eat or drink in that race. Quite a lot. So how many people, if we have a show of hands for anyone who doesn't, like Jess, doesn't really eat and drink anything much significant during that distance?
I drink, but I don't eat.
Drink, but you don't eat, and you drink, don't eat.
Well, I've got to, but I've got a gag reflex. And when I'm pushing hard, I
Yeah,
eat.
it's a really good point.
Keep it in my mouth, and that's it. And then spit it out. And
Yeah.
I do it like this.
Yeah. I think it is a fine line, because as someone, I used to race sprint Olympic distance and moved up to Ironman, and it was all, you know, I started racing Olympic distances in the 1990s, and really it was almost sort of frowned upon to drink or eat anything much during the races, whereas I go to a lot of races now and see some people have got 3 or 4 gels taped to their bike and 2 big bottles of energy drink and things like that, and it does generally seem like there's been a trend towards taking in a lot more rather than racing lean and light on the nutrition.
Yeah, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I mean, I find, as you do, that I've tried energy gels, they've given me cramps on the run. I've tried bars and can't get it down. And I've tried just energy drink, and I just find it a little bit too sugary at the end. All I just want is water, and sometimes if you mix your bottles up and you put energy drink on your head and well, whatever, it doesn't feel very good. So
yeah, I think it's.
But,
to breathe and swallow something.
Well, I think it's a fair comment in that the faster you're going, the less opportunity you've got to eat and drink, and the harder it becomes. So, you know, clearly in Olympic distance, the chance you've got to get most fluid or calories in, if you're going to, is going to be on the bike, because there might be some downhill stretch where you can coast and take something in. But other than that, if you're working really, really hard, but of course that depends on your fitness level, because for someone like Jess who's getting around an Olympic distance in under 2 hours, then, you know, it's at 90% of maximum effort, whereas for people who are less fit, it might be more appropriate that you're going more slowly, and you're going to be out there 3 hours. You're going to take in a few more calories to match with the duration of being out there. So I think it's quite an individual
to be
case.
fair, yeah, I think I was one of the only, probably, well, I couldn't say for everybody, but you see a lot of people, even in the elite races, with gels like taped to the. So I wouldn't say I was in a majority. I think it just, like you say, it depends on how your metabolism works. If your body is happy to get through 2 hours without, you know, bonking or whatever. I've never had a problem of bonking in a race, but obviously if you see chicks or guys with 2-3 gels on their bikes, then they've obviously had that experience and they need that energy. So, you know, when we're talking about world champions and stuff, so I think it's very, very individual. You need to find your balance.
Yeah. Kat, would you mind talking us through a little bit of your sort of Ironman breakfast and what you're generally eating on the day in the race there?
So I think when I go to races, people around me are pretty astounded at how much I can actually put away. And I mainly do it the night before. And essentially it's often because I'm in a different country and there's like loads of exciting food around. So I eat a lot the day before and then eat quite a bit for breakfast as well. I don't get up especially early to do breakfast. I just eat it when I get up at the time that I need to get up at to get everything done before I need to race, if that makes sense. So in Kona, everyone else was setting off like crazy early and I needed a lift, so I just had to get up at that time. But you're not really sleeping that much anyway, so I'm generally quite excited to get up and have breakfast. I swear by Weetabix. Apparently Chris Hoy eats Weetabix. Yeah. Oh no, maybe shredded wheat, I don't know. But Weetabix is great, I love it. So that's probably what I'll have on race day, and like literally everything else I can find. If it's edible and it's within reach, then I eat it pretty much. So that's like sort of malt loaf, and there's this amazing like Lincolnshire plum loaf that is like by some tiny producer in my hometown, and my dad keeps telling them that it makes people win stuff, and they don't really get it at all. But it's really nice. And yeah, so a load of that, and maybe like one gel, because they're pretty tasty too. And then just kind of the normal stuff on the bike. Like I chop everything into little bits so that I can kind of meter it out, because otherwise I'd probably just eat it all in the first half hour. So yeah, I just have a mix of bars and gels and stuff like that. I don't tend to put any sugar in my drink, because I like my drink to be refreshing when I'm kind of eating so much other stuff. And then on the run, I never eat as much as perhaps you're supposed to, because I just don't really feel like it, but then I don't really feel too bad on the run, so I just kind of listen to my body for the run, but I do it kind of by the clock on the bike.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the bike, are you eating to a fairly rigid schedule?
Yeah, pretty much.
What would be your aim to get in within, say, an hour on the bike?
Well, I heard Chrissy Wellington once say that it was like a gram per kilo of carb. So per kilo of your own body weight, you want to kind of have about a gram of carb an hour. Yeah. I never actually managed that. but I roughly get near there. So that'll be a mix of bars and gels, just to kind of keep it interesting,
And
really.
in real world terms, what does that look like for someone of your size and weight?
So I think it's like, it'd probably be like half a bar and a couple of like cliff shot block things and maybe one gel.
Yeah, and that's every hour on the bike.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've had the winter season, so I haven't raced for a little while. But yeah, that'd generally be it. And then sometimes just put in something a bit random to like tick off an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
That I like a dried banana or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then afterwards, again, just kind of eat whatever I like. But generally, stuff that I like is going to be like fresh and yummy and fruit, generally.
Yeah. Cool. Can I just ask Stu as well, just to get a direct comparison there, Stu? You're obviously a little bit bigger than
so it's very different.
So go on, tell us what you eat on the bike or through the Ironman. Basically.
Yeah, so I mean, normally for an Ironman, they're really early starts. So it's maybe a 7 o'clock start. So it means that you're up at 4 o'clock in the morning, making breakfast. My favourite breakfast, if I can get it, because most of the time you're in hotel rooms, is to have some just white pasta with 2 poached eggs, a bit of parmesan and a bit of basil just cut. That's my favourite breakfast before an Ironman. But chances are, if you're in a hotel, you probably can't get that. So the nearest I can get to that is probably bringing some muesli from home and just having some muesli in a cup in my room. No, I really. Honestly, you should try it. It is the best breakfast. But if I can have that, then that's kind of sets me up for the day, and I feel good going to the race. Before the swim, I'll have a gel, and I'll have a caffeinated gel. Normally, before and going into an Ironman, I would have cut out caffeine about 2 weeks before. So the caffeinated gel really kind of kicks in. Even my face tingles when I have that before the swim. So it kind of really gets you on that edge. And then if it's a saltwater swim, then coming out of the water, you normally feel a bit sick because you've swallowed loads of salt water because you're in there for an hour and you've been kicked in the face a few times. So getting on the bike, the first thing I do is just make sure I get some just fresh plain water down to try and flush out all of that salt water from my mouth, and then try and get trucking, really, just build a routine on the bike. In terms of calories, I work out that I need about 300 calories an hour, so that would mean 1.5 packs of Cliff shots. In my bottle, I'll have H2 Pro electrolyte, which if you're racing in hot conditions, then it really helps out and stops cramps later on in the race. When I hit the run, I still take on quite a lot of calories. When you hit the run, there's no way that you've been able to consume the amount of calories that you need. So a lot of your stuff would have come from burning fat. So you're pretty much empty when you hit the run. I take a gel every 15 minutes. So and if I can't get the gels that I like on the course, then I'll carry them in my back pocket. It may mean that I start the run with 8 gels in my back pocket, and then at special needs I take another 4. But I know that I need that amount of calories to get me through the race. After the race, I eat anything. I love hamburgers. I don't eat a lot of them, but I love hamburgers. So I'll find the best hamburger place, during race week, and then after the race, I'll go there and have the biggest hamburger they do. And that's kind of like a treat and something to look forward to when you're having those really dark moments on the run or the bike, thinking, oh God, when I get to the end of this, I'm going to have that hamburger. Whatever gets you going and keeps you moving.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to pick up on one point that Stu raised, because it's something that I definitely used as an athlete as well, is taking a gel in the last 10 or 15 minutes right before the start. It's not something that everybody does, but show of hands, has anyone tried that with races? Quite a lot of people have. The theory behind it, and Joel can correct me probably if I'm not spot on with this, but basically you obviously a gel enters the bloodstream very quickly, so the glucose and the sugar will be within your system from your mouth into your bloodstream within about 15 or 20 minutes, making it available. Now, at the start of a race, you'll have a lot of adrenaline, which is pumping. And adrenaline, one of the things that it does, apart from put your heart rate up and increase your blood circulation, is it mobilises glucose into the blood because you're ready to go, because the body's not actually quite sure what's happening. You're getting nervous, and in the good old days of evolution, we'd have been maybe getting ready to run away from something that was trying to eat us. So the triathlon start, the other athletes maybe aren't trying to eat you, but what you are doing is getting that same fight or flight adrenaline rush. So your glucose utilisation, or the availability of it, goes up in the bloodstream, and if you can get a gel in during that critical time period at the start, what you're actually doing is you're sparing some of the glycogen that's stored in your muscles, because your body doesn't have to release as much from stored energy. So it's actually, if you can get that gel down in the last 10-15 minutes, and then you're going to have quite a quick start to the race, it can be quite a good way to spare quite a bit of energy for later on. Is that a fair summary, Joel, of the sort of theory?
If you do that though, does an insulin kick in and take it away?
So the question was about insulin response. Insulin is the hormone that reduces reduces the blood sugar level, and can, in some circumstances, if you take in a lot of sugar, the theory is that you get a big release of insulin, which then drops your blood sugar level below where it needs to be before it comes back up again. And that's the reason why you do it in the last 10 or 15 minutes, because you're not taking in loads of it. One gel is not a phenomenal amount, and also that timing doesn't allow that kind of rebound to happen. It's one of the reasons why the recommendation is not to eat too much in the last couple of hours, because you can run the risk of that. Having said that, all these responses are quite individual, so you kind of have to know what works for you, I think. Before we move on out of that, has anyone got any specific questions around sort of this the race day nutrition in particular? This gentleman here, do you want to use the mic now?
Thank you. I just wondered, the initial conversation we had about the 80-20 use of natural foods wherever possible, and having natural wholesome foods in the diet, obviously clashes with race day nutrition, because you're reliant on processed foods and gels. I just wondered if any of the panel would come across natural foods that they were able to use to the same extent, or is it a case that the format of gels is just better than anything natural out there that's able to give them energy ahead of or during a race?
If I start really quickly on that one, from my perspective, I think one of the things about using processed gels and supplements during racing is that they come in the most sort of convenient format, and you can, if you look at Dave Scott's here talking later on, and you look at some of the good old photos from the 80s and the Ironman, people had bananas taped to their bike and those sort of things, which does provide good energy and that sort of thing, but not quite as convenient and as stable a product as that you get in a processed thing. It doesn't necessarily make those things fundamentally better, because when it gets broken down by the body, it ends up as glucose, but it does make them more convenient. So that's one possibly good reason. The other reason that I was always told as an athlete was to use things which are very low in fibre just before and when you're racing, because fibre, although it's great as part of a healthy diet, and processed foods, a big characteristic of processed foods versus whole foods is the lack of fibre. That's actually kind of an advantage when you're racing, because you don't want to be going to the toilet, especially in long races. It can happen, but it's an annoyance if it does. And more than that, you can actually get quite a lot of fibre sat in the stomach, which is collecting water and becoming heavy, and is something you don't necessarily need. So that would be my take on it. It would be interesting to hear. Does anyone want to dive in with, does anyone use other stuff in races other than packaged foods?
I mean, my only experience is having used bars when I first started racing Ironman, and I moved to fluids since then. So either gels, blocks, but I started off racing with bars. And I was doing a race in Lanzarote, and part of the race takes you straight up quite a big climb. And although I'd taken in enough calories in that first hour, because of the climb and because of the extra workload, my stomach wasn't able to process any of that food. And, I kind of felt sick and I felt bloated. And it was only when I came down the hill the other side that my stomach was getting enough blood to be able to start processing and breaking down some of those bars. But going up there, I kind of had a horrible time. And actually, I thought that was the end of my race. And since then, I've moved to as a simple form of energy that my body can kind of take on and digest.
My dad did an Ironman once, and I remember he made sandwiches for the transition area. That worked quite well. He got round.
I would take natural stuff, but it's just not very practical at all, and it's not very compact either. Like you say, bananas stuck to your bike, it kind of undoes all the aero-ness of your bike, which is a bit of a shame when people think really hard about that. Yeah, true, you could probably use it to your advantage, but I'm not smart enough to be able to do that. So I do actually use bars, and I use Cliff bars, which, because they are quite wholesome, they do have a fair amount of fibre in them, but not masses. And I think because I do eat so much healthy, fresh stuff generally, your body gets used to dealing with a certain amount of fibre, and it doesn't really seem to affect me or bother me at all. But then, if I'm still racing in 10 years' time, ask me then, and I might have just found this whole new way of fueling. I don't think it's bothering me, but I don't have so much experience that I know whether or not I could be going better. But it seems to be working okay at the moment.
Yeah, anything to add, Joel, on your experiences with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, thank you. I think there's probably quite a bit to be said. Probably don't have enough time. First of all, I think there's been an interesting boom in the last few years surrounding sport nutrition products, where they have become a lot more natural. So they're still processed to a degree, but there's a move towards, instead of using just refined sugar, maybe using sort of brown rice syrup, and those kind of things, which is one of the ingredients that Cliff Bar use as an alternative. One of the things I would say about sport nutrition products as a whole is that if you buy cheap, you buy dear. It costs money to get the really good ingredients, but for that you get less processing, but you also get a lot better nutrient profile in the ingredients. So it's worthwhile looking at the packets as you go around later today. Look at the packets of sport nutrition bars and gels that are there in front of you. How many ingredients are there? If there's more than 7 or 8, you can start to think, okay, that's quite heavily processed. So now, do I recognise a lot of those things that are in there? And if they look like naturally kind of foodie stuff that maybe you could even make at home, then great. That probably means it's not too processed. It probably means it will hold quite a lot of good nutrition for you. If there's a lot of stuff that you can't pronounce, that looks a little bit chemically like someone we put it together in a lab, that probably means it's the stuff that is going to have a lot of the nutrients taken out. So you can answer that question for yourself as you go around and come down and compare the different products, and come down to the Cliff stand and put what these guys have said to the test by looking at the packets. The other thing in terms of research is that there's some interesting research in the last couple of years which compared dried fruit, specifically California raisins, against gels in terms of their ability to support performance, and what they found is that the raisins were maybe slightly better. So there is that option as well. That was against a very refined kind of processed gel as well. You have to be careful with that, because the type of carbohydrate in dried fruit, or fruit as a whole, is fructose, and that can cause some stomach problems with some people. So it's something to try in training. But if we want to be really all natural about it, then dried fruit presents a good option.
Cool, thanks, Joel. Any other specific questions around nutrition in races? If we can, we'll come back to this gentleman next as well.
You was talking about your white bread and your jam sandwich. I've heard a lot of athletes that do that. But you've got, is that why you have the white bread? Because of the wheat? Because I've read, obviously, and done a bit of research, that wheat, it takes a long time to digest, and they recommend that you don't sort of have that kind of stuff prior to a race or an event?
Yeah, I mean, usually in normal terms, like this morning, I'd have brown bread as whole as, brown or a wholemeal as I can find. But before a race, I will go for, full-on French white bread, as much processing as possible, just because, it has, it's just full of sugar and has very little fibre or anything in it. So it's a good way to take in calories without really bothering your intestines too much.
So it is right that you're best staying off the wheat, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, for a shorter distance, again, as Andy said, the shorter the race, theoretically, the higher the intensity is going to be, and the higher the intensity, the less blood you're going to be getting around your intestines. So the harder, the more likely you are to get stomach cramps, etc. I mean, there's obviously different problems related to the long distance racing, but that's why I'd say Catherine can eat shredded wheat or Weetabix before a race, and I would never try that because I've tried it in the past, and just you get stomach cramps straight away. Even in this one.
Different energy level, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean it's different. It's different amounts of energy needed at different peak. You need a very strong peak in short distance, and it's like a long, steady flow in long distance. Basically, I mean I'm not going into technical details, obviously, but that's how I've tested lots of different things, and basically the thing I can find everywhere and is easy to digest is just the white bread. I mean, it's sometimes put a little bit of butter on it, but
Sounds good to me. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just easy to take down.
We had another question about race nutrition as well.
In professional cycling, in the last probably 2 or 3 years, they're going away from your classic sports nutrition gels, etc., and they're going more for rice cakes, baked eggs, jam sandwiches, ham sandwiches. Do you, especially the guys that do the longer distance stuff, do you see either your fellow athletes or competitors or yourselves, have any of you experimented with that or tried that? I know, as you said, Catherine, you can't, there's the aero disadvantage of having a load of ham sandwiches stuck to your top tube.
Yeah, I actually spent a year working for Team Sky as a medical assistant, and so went out with some of their training camps and things. Was kind of sitting in the car and passing this stuff to them. And I would love to have a car driving next to me and have all my kit in the car, so you don't have to decide what you're going to wear, you just stick it in the car. And there's all these perfectly little packaged and origamied little rice cakes and stuff, and they're really delicious as well. But again, it's the convenience. If I had that, and if I had people passing stuff out the windows to me, and you literally have anything you might want in the back of the car, then that's what I would be using. And I do look a bit ridiculous when I ride, because I just really push the limits of what you can fit in your pockets, because this stuff isn't compact. And I like baking as well, and I have to bribe people with cake and stuff. Yeah, it's not something I'm seeing many of my friends doing, or the people around me. And I think it is led by the professional cyclists, because they've got those sort of people helping them out who can pass some stuff out of windows. But for the rest of us mere mortals, we'll probably have to stick to stuff which is more practical.
Yeah, if I can dive in there as well, just for the kind. Have you come across the book called Feed Zone by Alan Lim? I was lucky enough to go and work on a training camp with Alan and some other coaches last year with a bunch of athletes that were sponsored by Red Bull, and he taught me how to make all those rice cakes and things like that. And we got up at 5 o'clock every morning and made big batches of them, and we were doing exactly that. Yeah, it's the amount that they were eating, these guys. But we were making savoury ones from the leftover curry the night before, even with sandwich between sushi rice, and then you wrap them up, and sweet ones with blueberries and lots of honey and things like that in there. And you're right, there's definitely a trend towards that, and certainly from chatting with the athletes and the cyclists that we were working with, they much preferred them on the road. But I think what Catherine said is exactly right, is that in cycling you've got two kind of big advantages where you can do that. One is the team car and the feed zone areas where you can pick up bespoke kinds of food, and the second one is the relative intensity of it. In a long road race, you've got long periods when you can sit up and eat and refuel and that sort of thing, whereas in an Ironman you're much more self-sufficient and reliant on what you can carry or what the race is giving out, and most races will give out gels and bars and drink, and that's about it. So I think people would love to move towards that, but the practicality of it is not quite as simple. Can we take another question?
Yeah, no, so I was just going to comment on that if I can. I think also the fact that if you look at the pro cycling effectively they're getting up day after day and doing the same thing. So the effects of processed food, processed gels on those guys, it was ripped to pieces. So I think there's more of a need in pro cycling than possibly is in a one-day event or a 7-hour event.
Yeah. So because this forms a big part of their diet. Yeah, so it's fair. Joel, anything to add on that?
You made the point that I was going to make, but I think one good thing for us all to come back to is when we think about nutrition and hydration, it's good to think ahead. Think, what demand are we placing on our body? Because we're going to digest stuff not as well when we're at higher intensity than when we're at lower intensity. That's a really important point to think of. And also the fact that we're going to use carbohydrate more, that more the intensity goes up, and fat as fuel more at a lower intensity. And coming back to this gentleman's point about the pro cycling and what Andy said, that's what's crucial, is that those guys might be sitting in the peloton, especially the good guys actually who are being protected, are going to sit in the peloton spinning away at quite a low wattage relatively for them, and therefore quite a low heart rate for maybe 4 hours of a 6 hours stage. So they can actually pretty much function almost as if they're at rest because they're so ridiculously fit. So the real food options are absolutely fantastic, and you'll see them using the gels just in the last couple of hours when the intensity really starts to ramp up. And so whereas with these guys doing Ironman, they're racing at pretty high intensity for hours and hours and hours, so the real food option does get kind of cut out by the fact that for a lot of people, and not everyone, they just might not be able to digest stuff quite as well, so it has to go towards that kind of refined sugars, processed stuff, or at least foods that are going to release their energy very quickly.
Cool. Thanks.
I think there are ways though when you are racing long distance that you can add in sort of like treats along so I mean I like Cliff do these chocolate gels that are kind of like Nutella, so I'll have those towards the end of my ride, so knowing that I'll have the citrus and raspberry ones at the beginning that I don't like so much, so actually when I get to the end of my ride I'll be having the chocolate ones because I can look forward to those. So you kind of just set these little goals and rewards at the end. So
it's more mental.
yeah, it is, and that's what long distance racing is. It's more mental than physical. Yeah, you can have guys that are in great shape, but mentally, if they give in to themselves, then they won't have a very good race.
Talking about the kind of whole foods thing, you are kind of limited, especially in an Ironman, on what the race organisers are offering you. So I suggest we start a campaign and get some better food on course. Because in Ironman South Africa, actually, they did offer sort of boiled baby potatoes, and they were like very lightly salted. And it sounds gross, and I never really eat potatoes, but they're just kind of bland and just very, very slightly salty, and they're just so refreshing on the marathon. Yeah. And some races do kind of do weird things. There was one I went to in Finland, and they had like pickled cucumbers at the end. Not gherkins, they were cucumbers. I don't really get that. But yeah, I think that maybe we could bring in a new trend.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with you there. I did a race last year called the Transalpine Trail Run, which runs in through the Alps, funnily enough, in Germany, Switzerland, Austria and Italy. And on the feed stations every day, they had some sports products, but mostly what they had was little bits of chopped up cheese, boiled potatoes, they had fruit and cake, they had tea and coffee and all sorts of things like that. I know it was hard. It was like a sort of a mobile dining experience, really. And little pots of salt that you could dip the things in as you went around. And what we found was, after a couple of days, it was an 8-day where you raced a stage a day for 8 days. And myself and my running partner, who I was running with, found that actually we were surviving quite a lot on eating little bits of cake, cheese, and chopped up fruit and nuts was what we were eating at the aid stations in between. That was just what we naturally would gravitate into after a couple of days. There was even some suspicious looking German sausages things there as well, which my running partner really got quite into, but I never quite got over I couldn't quite get over how they looked in order to eat them during the race. But I think what it definitely taught me was that, you know, your body, if you really just kind of listen to your body, and you see the opportunity in that race was you could see all this stuff laid out for you, and you knew what you wanted. And who'd have thought you'd want to eat a handful of blocks of cheese, you know, halfway through a marathon trail run, but you did, and you felt better for it, and that was a big learning curve for me. So I think it's possible.